Hello, friends. We are back at episode 204 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. Editor's note, I still am not used to saying 200 something yet, but I'll get there eventually. Nonetheless, this is the podcast where we talk about the awesome resources that are shared every single week at ourweekly.org. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm delighted to join us from wherever you are around the world. And joining me at the hip after some rather nervous firmware updates is my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing?
Gotta love Windows, Eric. Yep, it was one of those mornings where I booted up the computer and had to sit and wait for about 10 minutes for a firmware update. But I think we're okay. We made it through.
We made it through. I still remember one of my older Android cell phones did one of those firmware updates, and it never woke up after that. So I'm one of those people, even in 2025, whenever I see anything do a firmware update, I'm crossing all my fingers and crossing my toes, and nothing blows up. But you are here, and I am here as well. No car failures this time around. So luckily from that, tech seems to be kind to us. But what else is kind to us? Our weekly itself. We got a lot to talk about today because we have not one, not two, not three, but four highlights to talk about today. So we're gonna keep your listening ears busy here. And our curator this week is Batul Almarzak, and as always, she had tremendous help from our fellow Our Wiki team members and contributors like all of you around the world with your poll requests and other wonderful suggestions. And we'll get your appetite whet for our content here, and because we are talking about one of the mainstays in the Tidy Models ecosystems for getting all of your data and getting your models into shape for that eventual cooking that you do with your machine learning and other types of models, and that is the recipes package. Recently had a 1.3.0 release updated on CRAN, and Tidy Models software engineer at Posit, Emil, is back with a nice roundup of the key new features that you may want to pay attention to. First of which, admittedly, this one gives me flashbacks to my early days of R, and especially reading certain CSV files. You'll know why in a second. Because there is an argument that's been around in the recipes ecosystem, strings as factors. Now, before you run away from your earbuds here and wondering, oh no, why are you bringing up such bad memories here? No, this is important because there are situations where by default, a string variable that's in your predictor set of variables that you're going to use in your model would be converted to factors by default. But that argument was located in a function called prep. Recipes, like a lot of the Tidy Models packages, have a lot of function names that definitely either make me hungry or make me want to cook right away. Nonetheless, now that argument, string as factors, has been moved to recipe itself, the recipe function to be exact. This is important because now you can take advantage of probably disabling this conversion in many different places in your recipes workflow. So Emil's got a nice example where they can see what it looked like previously and using it in the prep function, and now using it in the actual recipe call right off the bat, so you don't have to keep using it over and over again if you have multiple prep calls in your pipeline for getting your recipe ready to go. And then also there are some deprecations to be aware of, one of which is for the step_select function. This was apparently due to maybe some issues people are having in their recipe workflows, and it didn't really play as nicely with what they felt was going on in the rest of the workflow. So there are cases where you can kind of migrate to some more fit-for-purpose functions on this, one of which is step_rm, which then you can feed in the columns that you want removed in that particular step without doing the negative or minus sign annotation that you might have done before with step select. And also for selecting variables, they do recommend that you are able to use some of the more select helpers, which actually gets touched on later in the post from the Tidy Select package that's often used in dplyr or tidyr and the like. They're bringing better support for that in the recipes package itself. And then lastly, there is a new argument being added to the step_dummy function. And there's nothing dumb about this. This is the the convenience function to convert a variable into indicator-like variables, often in categorical outcomes or predictors. So you can use these in many of the machine learning models. And in the past, if you wanted to specify how the contrasts associated with that categorization were performed, you had to feed that into an options statement, such as options, contrasts equal, and then you might give it the either treatment, contr.treatment, or the contr.poly. Those are two ways to define contrast. Now you can define that in step_dummy itself. To me, I tend to not use options unless I absolutely have to, because I think it does break a little bit of reproducibility. And somebody that I'll help debug code with has set an option way somewhere else in their .r profile, in their home directory, or some other place. And I'm like, what gives? Why is this digit rounding happening here? What's going on? So, not that I'm bitter. So I think anything you can have more transparent in the function itself is a win in my book. So I think that is a great new capability. And then also there has been some performance improvements where the step_impute_bag function, which is often used whenever you have to do the bagging pre-processing for your machine learning model, such as random forest or gradient boosting, when I've used those in the past. There have been memory issues in the past for tree models, and now they've minimized the footprint quite a bit. And in the example MO cites here, going from 75 megabytes for one bagging step now down to 20. That's a nice win when you scale this up immensely to different CPU architectures, especially if you're trying to be nice to your HPC admins, which I try to do. And there's a lot more to this release. The blog post has a link to the release notes if you want to get more details. But it's great to see the momentum on tidy models keeps pushing forward. And yeah, even the artwork in this blog post makes me want to eat right after this, Mike. How about you?
Same here. Yeah, a couple interesting things, on the removal of the step select, or essentially deprecating that. It looks like the recommendations there are that you use just dplyr select to select which variables to use in your model before passing the data into the recipe where possible. Now that step select is deprecated, they're recommending that you use step remove. So that will, by default, remove the variables that you include in that statement. But if you negate them, it will include the negated ones. So it's almost like a flip of what step select was previously doing. So you may have to wrap your mind around that a little bit if you want to continue to leverage this inside of your recipes workflow. And then the other one, Eric, that I'm not sure if you touched on was that tidy select can now be used anywhere and everywhere within recipes. And I think previously there were a few different steps or functions, if you will, like step_pls and step_impute_bag that we also talked about, that have maybe specialized arguments that previously asked you to select variables for the arguments of those functions in a particular way that was not compatible with your typical tidy selection. And now that is no more. Tidy selection can be used pretty much everywhere throughout all of the different functions within the recipes ecosystem. So that's definitely a great quality of life improvement here. And that memory reduction for step_impute_bag, for those that fit a lot of bag tree models, I think is great. I was a little surprised that Ames data set that they use in the example, I think is pretty small, right? And that took 75 megs previously and now takes 20 megs. So if you scale that out to maybe a significant size data set, I don't know, what the relative size of your average machine learning data set would be compared to the Ames data set, but not only would that memory footprint probably be bigger than those numbers, but also what you're getting back is going to be bigger as well. So that's a great improvement there. And always love to see that the Tidy Models team continues to work on the recipes package, because in my opinion, and I know that it's an opinionated framework in and of itself, but it is just fantastic for doing machine learning, for the hardcore machine learning folks out there, to be able to set up these workflows in sort of like this purr-like fashion that allows you to really iterate over all sorts of different combinations and different algorithms that you want to leverage really quickly in a way that, used to take a crazy amount of time from my days in Carrot.
I was going to say the same thing. That's how I first got into machine learning environment, was the carrot package. And still remember being one of Max Kuhn's early days of the carrot package. He did a workshop at a local stack conference here in the Midwest, and I was mesmerized by the power of it. But boy, it took me a while to get my head around it. Recipes alongside tidy models itself. I really like the having dedicated packages for each part of this process. And if you're wondering, like, where do you go to learn more, we'll put a link in the show notes to the Tidy Models website, which has tons of resources. The online book, there are actually more than one online book about all this, some of which is more of the practical day-to-day, and others more on the statistical theory behind a lot of the choices. There's a lot to choose from here. And like you said, Mike, it's really great to see this getting pushed forward. And even though my day job doesn't do as much of the machine learning side as it used to, there are cases where, especially when you get to that infamous exploratory analysis perspective, you're asked to do a lot with less, and you could do much worse than throwing some tidy models action in front of that data set to find that hidden subgroup of records that shows that improved effect. Don't ask me why I say it that way. It's a volatile industry. What can I say? Up next, we're going to visit the visualization corner, as we like to call it here on the Highlights program, because it's an annual tradition since about 2022 or perhaps sooner. Around the springtime, there is a 30-day chart challenge that's released online. And the 30-day chart challenge was originated by Cedric Schur and Dominic Royal. This is, like I said, been running a few years now, and we've seen a lot of esteemed members of the R community take their visualization chops to work and learn some new things along the way. And in particular, a frequent contributor to the Highlights program, Nicola Rini, is back with her roundup and her perspective on what she created for the 2025 edition of the 30-Day Chart Challenge. And she's been doing this for a few years now, but she kind of did things slightly differently this time around, which I think are kind of intriguing. And one of which is she tried to challenge herself in different technical stacks. She is definitely primarily an R user, but as we've seen in previous highlights, she is venturing into other visualization frameworks along the way, notably Observable and D3 for some great interactive web-based visualizations. And also alongside this, in this 30-day chart challenge, they don't necessarily tell you what the data is you're visualizing, unlike the Tidy Tuesday initiative that does ask you to create a visual based on the data set in mind for that week. Here, you might be asked to do a challenge of a visualization showing relationships between variables, or maybe a time series visualization, but you get to pick the data. So what she was trying to do to save time and kind of challenge herself at the same time is to reuse data sets in multiple ways. And we'll get to some of that shortly. And then lastly, try to up her annotation game, so to speak, on some of these visuals by adding more text and annotations to these charts to really show some key insights in these visualizations. So when we talk about the data she used, there was one particular data set that she drew upon for multiple visualizations, and that was a set released by the Our World in Data project on income inequality as shown by the share of income that's received by what is deemed the richest 1% of the world population. And she thought this would be a great way to visualize not just that data set on a whole, but also to look at how it relates to other data sets that may or may not be in that same domain. And this rather fun plot we're about to talk about here is getting back to maybe some examples you've had in either a statistics or data science course where the underlying theme is correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation, because this awesome line plot here is showing how apparently as the rich got richer, so to speak, and taking more of the share of the income, some reason the population of wild birds in the world just started to decrease in that time span. Are they buying the wild birds and just keeping them capped? Hey, you didn't hear from me. I have no idea. But if that doesn't make sense, you're right. It doesn't make sense. That was definitely for the spurious relationship side of the challenge. But that was an interesting take on it, because usually you hear about the ice cream and murder rate example. This was a fresh take on that. So I enjoyed that. And then also that's just one plot that she made. If you're interested in all the plots that she made for each 30-day or 30 of the 30-day challenge, she actually created a Shiny app powered by Shiny Live and WebAssembly, which we'll link to in the show notes, and you can look at each day and what she created, which will have links to the source code behind those visualizations. So I had fun in the prep for this episode, just thumbing through that. And there was one other one that caught my eye, maybe for, again, a lot of the wrong reasons, but this time very much intentional. There was a part of the 30-day challenge where you were asked to create a chart associated with extraterrestrial domains like aliens or whatnot. So she makes this, I hate to say it, this abomination of a bad chart, which looks like my screen is glitching in different parts, like if somebody hit the screen of the monitor, because it's all weird, jaggy, fuzzy resolution. But she made this chart. You'll have to see it to believe it. Apparently in future blog posts to illustrate just what can go wrong in these visualizations. And I can already see about 5 or 6 things horribly wrong with that chart. So that was a doozy there. But again, you can check out the rest of the visualizations in her Shiny app that she created. Well, again, I have a link to that in the show notes. But again, this isn't just about being creative. She actually learned some great, new and interesting technical observations too, Mike. So why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, Eric, some of these plots are really interesting. That extraterrestrial one is pretty funny as well. One of the things that Nicola, among the many things that she was trying to try out, new during this 30-day chart challenge, is she leveraged not only ggplot, but also explored the tidyplots package. And she was really encouraged by how easily portable her ggplot code was to the tidyplots framework, it seems like, and just how clean the syntax was. And I know that that's one that we've touched on a few times in the highlights. It's not one that I've had the chance to get to yet, but I have been blown away by everything that I have seen from a documentation perspective on the tidyplots package. I think there's a great landing page for tidyplots that has some fantastic examples, and the visuals just look beautiful. And when you take a look at the code behind the visuals, it's almost shocking how concise the syntax is, how few lines of code it takes to get to really nice plots using tidyplots. Another thing that she explored on the R side was using the ggiraf package in JavaScript to create drop-down menus. I'm a little interested in how she did that, and if that ported over to her Shiny Live app as well. If it was some sort of an HTML widget that she was able to create. Are you familiar with doing that, Eric?
I have not tried that, so I'm going to be looking at that code too after this episode.
Definitely. And then she built a function to do something which is something that I always struggle with, depending on what operating system I'm working on and what dependencies are there and which aren't. But take a screenshot of charts that you built, and she leveraged the HTTP-UV package, particularly a run static server, and then a stop all servers function from that to, I guess, spin up a server and then use WebShot 2 to actually take the picture, to take the screenshot, and then store that as an image in a particular folder using this really small, nice little tidy function she developed called save.js.png. So that was great. And she also leveraged some Python as well. And she still wants to work on some examples of combining Python data processing and visualization in Observable via Quarto, which I can attest to is super easy because we have that just great ability to pass R and Python objects into observable OJS data frames, I think with very, very little code, and that's all documented in the Quarto website. So I would encourage you to check that out if you'd like. It's great for static servers like GitHub pages and things like that, or even just sharing an HTML file with someone if you don't have really the capacity to stand up, a whole server for a Shiny server type of web application. So that's awesome. She had some advice here for chart challenges. If you're somebody who's interested in getting into these 30-day chart challenges to try to push your data visualization skills. And one of her biggest pieces of advice is try to use the same data for multiple charts. And I think that's a great piece of advice to try to get you to think less about the data and more about the visualization side, and really try to open up that creative side that at least me and maybe some other data scientists out there may be weaker on, compared to the data processing side. She had a couple highlights of some other favorite charts that other folks built throughout the challenge, which are absolutely beautiful. And like you, Eric, I loved checking out her Shiny Live app and just taking a look at all of these different charts through the past 4 years that she's developed across 30 days. So I guess that's 120 different possible charts that you can take a look that Nicola developed. And not only can you take a look at these beautiful charts, you can see the source code behind them. And it, again, makes me want to create my first Shiny Live app. That is something I still haven't gotten to either, but it's high on my list here.
We got to rectify that pretty soon.
I know.
Because it's moving fast, man. It's moving fast. But I really enjoyed all these visuals here. And, I have the creative chops of a stick figure when I do visuals. But boy, it sure is inspiring to see what Nicola and other great community members are able to come up with in these chart challenges. So yeah, if you're on like the Mastodon or Blue Sky, you'll see a lot of these charts being thrown out there on social media, much like the Tidy Tuesday visualization. So it's a lot you can be inspired by. Sometimes you'll see them in the most unlikely places too, because I actually did see, it wasn't in the 30-day challenge, but during the hockey playoffs, I frequent the hockey subreddit just to see what angst or excitement is out for various teams. And there was somebody that did a visualization of the brackets of the teams progressing to the next round, but they did it in the style of Lego bricks, where you would have little Lego dots indicating the wins, and then and showing the team with like a nameplate with the names on them. And the Stanley Cup in a gray kind of Lego mosaic like setup. Man, if I got like 2 months of just uninterrupted time, I would create that in R and just see how ugly or good it looks, because there's lots of, no matter where you look, there's always places to up your game. And I definitely appreciate Nicola taking some new ideas, new frameworks, and seeing where she could push the envelope on. And also, when you're doing interactive visualizations, not necessarily the topic of this post here, boy, I just love those packages out there with what we call the batteries included, so to speak. I've had another project at the day job where eCharts for R by John Cohen has saved my behind on this really nice line plot, interactive zooming on the x-axis right off the bat, tooltips right off the bat. It just is so elegant. I think those are great. When you have the idea for the visual, you just don't have the time to get into the nuts and bolts of JavaScript and CSS land. eCharts for R is one of those that just takes care of so much for you. So I'll never turn down a chance to plug that awesome package.
It's the best.
We're going to take quite a diversion in the highlights, because we're going to go from a visualization corner to really challenging yourself with some more fun math teasers. But admittedly, after I play with this, I almost can't believe it works, but it actually does. So this blog post for this next highlight comes to us from a fellow R Weekly curator, Jonathan Carroll, who, as you've heard in previous highlights, he loves to test his might both on interesting mathematical challenges and interesting languages that conduct them, and this post has both. So in this case, he was inspired by a post that he saw on Mastodon that was sent by Greg Egan on this kind of brain teaser that actually has a solution. So imagine you have a number that has a set amount of digits, let's say 4 digits, and then you want to what we call rotate the numbers. So imagine you have the number 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 digits. And you want to rotate it so that maybe the 1 and 2 go behind the 3 and 4. It's almost like if you have pieces for this, you're just kind of shuffling the order a little bit. Apparently, now I'm going to try to narrate this in audio as best I can. There is a mathematical derivation to get to that solution for any number if it meets one of the following constraints. If that number n is not the same as 10 to the power of the number of digits of that number minus 1, there is a formula you can use to get that derivation. It goes like this. The number n times 10 to the power of the number of digits, k in this case, and the mod or modulo, which is like in division, getting the remainder of that, the right-hand side of this is 10 to the power of the number of digits minus 1. Yes, this works. I tried this out. I wrote up my R session. I did that number 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to rotate it by 3 digits and then see if I could get that right answer, which is 4, 1, 2, 3. And yes, that formula actually works. I'll put that in the, well, John did that as well. He almost didn't believe it worked either, but he thought, okay, how do I make this more general? It's great for a specific example. He has solutions in his blog post, both in the R language and the Julia language, which, as you read it, they do make a bit of sense. He's able to get the length or the number of digits in that number. An interesting trick in R to do that is that the nchar function will automatically convert like an actual double or integer to a character and then get the number of digits. That's kind of slick in and of itself. But you have to watch out if it's a negative number. It won't quite give you the right answer in that case. But then he's able to plug that in and then do the mod operator in R, which is 2% signs, and get a function, very simple function, a one-liner to get this done. And sure enough, it works. Not quite vectorized, though. So that's where he has an interesting package called vec, which he's written about in his blog before, which apparently does some neat trick with ring buffers and using the indices of vectors to get to that same solution. So again, all the code is in the blog post, and his function rotate indeed works in both ways on that. Julia, again, pretty similar, albeit he does think it might be a bit simpler because there is an actual n digits function that is fit for purpose for actual numeric values and not just strings, which means it isn't as susceptible to that negative sign issue that the R solution might be. But there are some other little gotchas along the way you have to be careful of. But again, it's a one-liner. And when you read the code, even if you're not a Julia programmer, you can kind of get a hang for how that works. And they do have a built-in way to deal with vectors with using, built-in Julia primitives and doing cyclic rotation. And again, all straightforward, at least in my opinion. Here's where things get odd, folks, because as John has done in his previous blog posts, he ventures into very niche languages for mathematics, and he talks about 2 of them here. And this is where you have to flip your perspective a bit, because now you have to deal with glyphs as the operators, not just typing just to be fancy. These are actual operators in these languages. And even in the case of this APL language, which he has written about before, and I think we featured on previous highlights, the order isn't left to right, it's right to left. So that's a lot to get your head around, but he narrates through how he found the different glyphs for these various operators, going from the typical assignment all the way to the mod operator, the negative operator, and more. And then when you read it, I mean, I can't even narrate it here in audio, but you'll see it looks pretty fancy, like almost like a mathematical equation. But my goodness, it works. And he puts a link to the tryapl.org interactive web-based editor. If you're not convinced, you can try this stuff yourself and convince yourself, but it indeed works. And then as that wasn't enough, there is a newer language out there called UIUA or UIA. I have no idea how to pronounce that one, but it is using stack-based language approaches, which apparently has its own kind of domain-specific operators, again, in glyphs as well. But this is a newer language, so there's not as much documentation out there other than the official docs. But sure enough, he's able to get a solution in place, but he has to think in terms of like stacking things on top of each other to make this happen, and not just the typical left to right, or even in the case of APO, right to left. So that that definitely got my head scratched a little bit. But again, fun brain teaser to look at. But this is a great way to challenge yourself. In one of my wife's group chats with some friends, she has some friends that do these math teasers like every week, and I think they would be all over this kind of language if they hadn't heard about it already. But again, if you are not convinced it works, I would say the proof's in this post, and the best part is you can try this out in multiple languages to feed that curiosity, or in the case of me, humble myself for what I don't know about how this stuff works. So, Mike, maybe talk me up a bit. Am I that bad with math, or is this just really out there?
I'm going to side on this is really out there. It makes me want to go back to the data visualization post because I feel like I'm over my skis. But I'm just teasing. It's a good blog post for me to get back into mathematics, get back into my roots a little bit, and tease my brain on this. And like you, I implemented this in R as well just to try it out for myself. And that's sort of the name of the game for how I was able to, I think, learn math more efficiently than I did prior to learning programming, because if I could program it, I could understand it, right? And I think that goes for a lot of folks out there. And initially, I think when I looked at this, just reading the blog post, I was like, what is going on? And then put it to code a little bit, and it started to make more sense to me a little bit. It's a cool little brain teaser. I think sometimes you are able to create some of these mathematical brain teasers if you'd like, sort of backwards. And I'm curious to understand who originally sort of came up with this concept and how they arrived at it. But it's super interesting. It's always funny to me. Sometimes I see on social media like somebody claiming to do magic with math and telling, hey, what's your age, and then figure out okay, subtract that from what year it is, and then multiply it by 9, and then they arrive back at their age or something like that, and people are mind blown. And it's pretty straightforward. So this one certainly not as straightforward, especially when you get down into the last two sections where we get into APL and UI UA, where we're starting to use hieroglyphs, in my opinion, to stitch together some of these equations, and we're going from left to right to right to left. Is APL the one that literally stands for a programming language?
You got it. Great callback to a previous episode.
Oh my goodness, I can see why. But I really appreciate taking a small little brain teaser like this and implementing it across these 4 different languages, just to showcase these different languages, the differences between them, the strengths and weaknesses that they have, and serve as an introduction to some of these languages for folks like me who are certainly less familiar with them. Always really interesting to read a Jonathan Carroll blog post.
Yeah, and I do have some colleagues at the day job that I think would be all over this if they get a free moment. So I'll probably send this their way and see what kind of brain teasers they can come up with, and see if APL makes sense to them or not. Boy, I'm amazed. All kidding aside, I'm amazed at the creators of all of this, because I don't think I could come up with this if you gave me 10 years to come up with something like this. My goodness, I have a hard enough time just of art itself. So this is amazing stuff. And speaking of amazing, going back to art for a second, we will close out this episode with our last highlight here, which has been a mainstay in the art community in terms of this content for years and years. It may have had different platforms it's been shared on, But Joe Rickert, who has been one of the founding, members of the R community that I've been following for years and years, is back with his monthly top 40 R packages roundup. I'm sure if you've been around the community for the years that Mike and I have, you may have seen this in his previous Revolutions blog post back when he was at Revolutions. That was in at Posit, and now he's got this in the R Works blog, which is a community effort led by him and Isabel Velasquez with other contributors as well. So again, we definitely don't have the time to talk about all 40 packages that Joe has come up with here. But as usual, he organized these by different domains, different industries, or different topics. And there were two that definitely caught my eye because they are relating to different projects I'm working on at the moment. The first of which is a package called AutoDB. This one's interesting because this one here is a way to, in essence, help you normalize a data frame by going to the third normal form. And admittedly, I don't know the nuts and bolts of that definition, but if you dealt with databases before, this will look a bit familiar to you. This has been authored by Mark Webster, and he does point out in the vignette that we'll link to in the show notes, he is using this as a way to inform data cleaning operations, investigating his data. He stresses that this is not meant for database design, even though you will see tabular representations of the different relationships in these data sets. It'll look very similar to a schematic you might have for a robust database table relationship diagram, or an ERD, I believe they're called. But again, really interesting because I am dealing with data at the moment coming from this API of this vendor with some other data sets we have in-house, and we do have to merge them together. And more importantly, we have to make sure that the constraints that we have told the vendor to follow are actually being met. So I could definitely see this as a tool to investigate these relationships and make sure things are sound. And maybe it goes nicely with a package like Point Blank by Richie Owen that also looks at the data quality as a whole if you have an ETL kind of process like I'm dealing with. So that one caught my eye. And then on the visualization side of it, a package called Kite Square, offered by John Wiedenhoft. Hopefully I said that right. This is a way to visualize contingency tables, which if you are dealing with, if you have, often you'll have like observe versus truth or rater agreement. You'll often do contingency tables for this. This is an interesting way to have kind of a square grid, but then showing these either discrepancies or similarities between these variables. And he likes the name kite because it rhymes with chi, as in the chi-square test that you often see in contingency tables. So I'll have a link to the GitHub repository for the package in the show notes, but definitely an intriguing visualization to kind of bling up that what can be a pretty utilitarian table representation. Maybe get a little visual around those marginal effects and those counts all in the same umbrella, all powered by ggplot2 under the hood. So you can feed this in a lot of different places. But that's only 2 of the 40 here, Mike. Did you see any that caught your eye as well?
On the risk management side, which is a space that I operate in quite a bit, there's a new package called EQRN in all caps. I got a version 0.1.0 release, and it provides a framework for forecasting and extrapolating measures of conditional risk, for example, of extreme and unprecedented events, which we seem to have more and more of lately, including quantiles and exceedance probabilities using extreme value statistics, which is a concept I'm familiar with, and flexible neural network architectures, which is interesting. There's a couple papers behind it and quite a few folks that worked on this package, and it has a nice package down site, which I am in the middle of checking out right now. So one, if you're in the risk space, to look out for.
Awesome. Yeah, I thought that might catch your eye, so I want to make sure you got that one. And yeah, very nice documentation here. So I could see this being very useful in your toolbox for risk-based assessments and analyses. Yep, great find there. And like we said, there's a ton more in this blog post for you to choose from. And even for the colleagues in life sciences, there is I kind of say this with kindness, yet another tables related package called Clinify. I laugh about this because it was not long ago, folks, that we didn't have any great table packages in R. And now, I don't want to say too much, but let's just say there's a lot of choice to be had here. And that's been a hot topic in some of my circles recently. But again, great to see advancements on that side of it too. And again, that's just scratching the surface of this entire issue, right? There's a lot more to choose from of additional packages that have been released, a great new set of resources. And we don't have time for additional finds because we had a whopper of an episode today, but definitely check that out. See what catches your eye, and best yet, you'll be able to get in contact with either the source code behind that great package or blog post, but also maybe make some connections in the future. And we also like to connect with all of you. First of all, the project definitely keeps going because of contributions from you out there with your pull requests for new content to be shared in the upcoming issue. How do you do that? Just go to rweekly.org. We got a link in the top right corner in the page, that nice little ribbon structure. You can click there and get to the GitHub repo right from there with a nice issue template. You can also get in touch with us personally on the episode show notes. We have a link to the contact page. You can send us your feedback there and get in touch with us on the various social media outlets. I am on Blue Sky I am on Blue Sky these days with @ourpodcast at bsky.social. Also, I'm on Mastodon with @ourpodcast at podcastindex.social. And I'm on LinkedIn. You can search my name and you'll find me there. And Mike, where can the listeners get a hold of you?
Sure, you can find me on Blue Sky at mike-thomas.bsky.social or on LinkedIn if you search Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK. You can see what I'm up to.
Awesome stuff. And again, thank you so much for joining us for listening to episode 204 of our Weekly Highlights. And we'll be back with another edition next week.